Richard, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Simon. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited. Listen, anytime I get a chance to have a chat about sales is always a good thing by me.
It could be a long one.
It could be. So sales and the way that sales are perceived.
Yep.
What do you think's the challenges there?
So I think there's quite a few challenges actually in the perception of sales. That's why that's been our mission since 2017. So I think sales generally has a bad perception by most people. I think buyers often trying to avoid engaging with salespeople if they can. Most salespeople and organisations will not have the word sales in most of their salespeople's job titles because they almost want to trick the customer into believing they're not being sold to. And I think the two issues that we see the most is certainly in the SME community, small businesses that are founder-led, owner-driven businesses that generally are started by people that aren't from our backgrounds. They struggle to understand what sales means for their small business, and it's often quite overcomplicated. And I think furthermore, as I said to you off air, like it's just not a career choice for people, and I find it bonkers. Like if you set 100 business owners in a room and said how many of you would take a good salesperson tomorrow that's going to add value to your organization, they're all going to put their hands up. But there's not many 15-year-olds at school at the moment considering sales as at least a considered career choice, let alone an aspirational one.
Yeah, well, there's nothing eluding as you go up through the ranks. Like I say ranks, I mean like schooling, education. There is nothing other than maybe a business degree that even alludes to sales as being a career. Yeah. I had no idea sales was a career. Like whenever I went through like schooling or careers advisors, I had some unbelievable. So I had some unbelievable things that were suggested to me, but like there was nothing ever suggested that you could be in sales and earn good money from it.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, so I don't know, like why do you feel like that is?
I think it doesn't help that Hollywood glamorizes the darker side of sales. If you think about sort of the famous sales orientated films, I almost don't want to say it out loud. I think about something like The Wolf of Wall Street. It's good entertainment, right? If you watch the film, it's good entertainment, but like it's actually horrific when you think about like they've glamorized this guy, manipulating, defrauding people, and actually now this guy gets paid money to train people in sales when actually he went to prison for defrauding people. It was a fraud scam, but that it's probably the most famous sales film that Hollywood's ever produced. And you got other ones like Boiler Room, which is basically the same story, and some of the older ones like Glengarry Glen Ross, but I suppose the reality is though, Simon, is that the sales done well is actually quite boring, and I mean that in a nice way. It's not Hollywood worthy sales done well. So I think that's a part of it, and I think. Even some of those business qualifications that you talked about, the sales, there's almost no sales curriculum in them. So they'll teach young people how to be in business. They'll probably go as far as marketing, and I love marketers to death, but it's only part of the equation. It's never all of the equation unless you're, I suppose, a B2C e-com brand. Maybe you can get by with some marketing knowledge. But I still remember now the conversation with my parents when I left school at 16. Tried to pursue a professional golf career for a couple of years, and I'm not sure what disappointed my dad more, or the fact I was giving up on the golf career, or the fact that I was going to go into a sales job. and I think probably that's the same for most young people.
The funny thing is, though, if you think about Wolf of Wall Street, right? So that is exactly what Hollywood is portraying as a salesperson.
That's people's most perception of sales is that
right? Which it is dark, right? And it is about lying, cheating, manipulation, a very eccentric character
with a drug habit.
Yeah, with the drug. You just see what I mean? All that. Some of us still have that problem, but like in sales, I'm not saying we don't. But like, actually, if you think about the best salespeople you've ever met, I had 20 years in sales, so most of those, in reality, sales is quite a slow, boring job at times.
Yep.
And actually, it's like the best salespeople are calm, considered, pragmatic, articulate. They do the basics really well. They 100%. Turn up every day. They build trust. There's transparent. All of those things. They're all kind of like the actual traits, but it's nothing like the world tells you.
Agreed. Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm a big believer that often get asked, is science, sorry, is sales a science or an art? For me, it's a science. It should be data led, it's process orientated. And, I kind of carved out my career running sales teams in manufacturing businesses. And I think one of the things I found fascinating was the approach in manufacturing to excellence and lean manufacturing and improvement and process improvement is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And there's lots of people that are very, very good at that. And yet those same manufacturing businesses will have sales teams and they'll run and operate them completely differently. The sales culture will be almost in isolation to how the rest of the business runs. But actually, improving sales in an organization isn't that much different to what it is to improve the operational side of the business. It often comes down to people, behaviors, process, and using data to drive all of that stuff. And like you say, it's not particularly glamorous. And what I found interesting, what you just said was about the calmness of good salespeople. I think again the perception is that to be a good salesperson, you've got to be the loudest person in the room, massively extroverted, kind of gift of the gab, kind of. And I agree with you. I think about the best salespeople I've worked with, that I've managed. They are calm, relaxed, relationship builders generally. They don't talk the hind legs off a donkey, and they're not that character that you see in the movies, which makes it pretty boring, I guess, for the script writers.
Yeah. So of course Hollywood has got a narrative of what it needs to look like because they're trying to sell a show, but in reality. So some of the best salespeople I've worked with, they're introverted.
Yep.
They listen far more than they talk.
Yes.
Right. And they just ask very smart questions. And they are focused on understanding the customer's business, understanding the problem that their solution can solve.
Yes.
And, we can turn that into being really curious or always be qualifying.
Yeah.
It's no longer always be closing.
Always be curious. Yeah, for me, ABC.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So however you look at those things, but it's like deeply trying to understand your customer. But that means you're building a relationship. You're asking intelligent questions about their business, how it operates, what are the challenges you're meeting. Well, what does that mean? Or what about this deadline? Does this mean anything to you? Like it's those sorts of things.
Yes.
It's more about peeling back the onion to understand exactly, like I've been in loads of sales situations before. And I just, on the first discovery or couple of calls you've had with a customer and go, I don't think you're going to make a decision on this because your problem's not big enough. You can't articulate your issue to me. So I'm like, what are we talking about here? And I think it's good to have actually the opposite to sales, which I call it when I work with my sales teams, a negative reverse, which is say the opposite to what you think a salesperson would say.
Yes.
A salesperson is going to sell you all the features and benefits. Do the opposite and explain to them why probably you're not going to make a purchase because there's not enough pain here.
Yeah, I agree.
There isn't going to be enough cost saving, or it's not going to be this. Like, are you really just like, what are you trying to find out here? You buying, or are you actually just trying to discover things? I think actually taking the opposite view actually builds more trust.
Yeah, I often talk about I think one of the things that good salespeople, well, there's lots of things they need to have, I think, but one of those things is knowing when to be optimistic, pragmatic, and pessimistic. And I think what often happens in sales is, I think certainly if you're in a more turnkey sales role where you are cradle to graving opportunities and you go out and finding stuff from scratch and bringing it through, I think to do that and to prospect, I think you have to err on a side of optimism. You have to have a level of belief in that because you get a lot of no's, right? And it's tough. The danger is then when you actually end up in a proper conversation with a customer, that optimist can be really dangerous. Because the optimist is hunting out the reasons why they're going to rather than the reasons why they're not. And often people don't challenge themselves then in that, or even challenge the customer, which is even better. And then furthermore, as you get down the back end of the process to any level of forecasting, that's where actually you need to be almost pessimistic about what's going in. Because again, we see routinely people over forecasting opportunities. So they kind of under forecast activity, under qualify opportunity coming in, and then over forecast kind of what's going to come in, which obviously, as you all know, creates issues in the business. But you said something really interesting then, which I'm a big believer in, which was around being experts in customers. And I think that's something we see. A genuinely chronic mistake that most businesses, and I'm not saying all businesses, because there's some great business out there, but most businesses, when they recruit and onboard salespeople, the training would extend as far as product training. And they will get them, I suppose, absolutely routined into here's our features and benefits, and this is what we do. It's what we do. Now go and speak to some customers about it. Here's a target market, target vertical. Go and speak. And we always challenge people that, you know, your salespeople should be people experts, like you say, rather than product experts. But most organizations onboard their salespeople and try and make them product experts, not people experts. And for me, the best salespeople are the best people experts. And even if their technical competency lets them down a little bit and they have to use other resources in the business to back that up, it's far better that way than it is actually not understanding your customer's business and just forcing features and benefits down people's throats, which is, again, sales done bad. And I think, unfortunately, too many customers have been on the wrong end of that, which is why, again, they have the view of sales that they do as well. I think we've all been on the wrong end of that.
Yeah, and that's where I can always tell when there's someone who's really working with a customer, is because it's really simple. The customer will reply to their emails, they'll be available, because they'll see them as someone they're collaborating with
To fix the problem.
It's part of the project team to fix a problem. To fix a problem they've got in the Look, companies don't buy for anything else. Then there's a problem.
Yeah,
there's got to be a problem,
Yes.
right? We don't, and that problem might be we need to hit X revenue growth, or that problem, might be a compliance issue, or it could be anything, right? But there has to be a kind of a really clear problem that's defined. Why would they do anything? Why would they spend money on a thing? Because the founder, the owner of the business, they don't want to eat into their profit. So what's the issue there?
Yeah.
So there has to be an issue.
Yeah.
And I think it's understanding that as much as you can. Even like I align to the medic kind of sales process methodology. So you're thinking about your champion. They might have a problem, but is it the founders or the CEO's problem? Is it the CFO's issue as well? Like, what's the actual issue, and is it shared across the business? It's always a big place to start.
But I think with that, again, common issues when it comes to people, or from the salesperson side, ticking a box. Okay, who is the authority here? Who's making decisions? They'll have a relationship with. I would say 9 times out of 10, they'll have a relationship with an individual. They will seek out possibly the hierarchically highest person they can find, and believe that that's where they're going to go. And like I say, often that problem's affecting multiple people in the organization. I also think businesses these days are more sort of committee driven when it comes to making decisions. I think department heads just autonomously making decisions doesn't really exist anymore. And I saw a study fairly recently that suggested there's just shy of 6 people involved in a typical B2B buying process from the other side. And yet most salespeople have got maybe barely call it a relationship, let's say a connection with one person. And we see that happen. We see that happen a lot. And actually, when you challenge that salesperson and say, draw me the org chart of that organization, not all of it, just the bit that affects. And I think, certainly in a high value, low volume sales arena, any salespeople should be able to broadly map out these are the protagonists in this story, right? And these are the people that they're speaking to. But often they have a reliance on this one person, the other side of it. And like you said, with medic, for me, it's like I find the subject of need quite interesting, and whether there is or whether there isn't one. And obviously the salesperson often is trying to convince their sales director or the sales manager that there is one. In the customer, sometimes trying to convince the customer that there is a need, but like pragmatically, is there really? And to your point, the seesaw that we always look at is a need is a need if the cost of not doing it is greater than the cost of doing it. But
that's a great way of explaining
it.
it.
Do you know what I mean? So but if that cup of water is £5, but it doesn't solve my thirst, and therefore I'm still going to have issues from dehydration, then the cost of the water's up here, and the cost of not doing it's down here, and that's something that I don't think is particularly difficult to figure out. Actually, I think if you objectively look at it in your customer and say, right, okay, we know we're going to be asking to invest X amount, thousands of pounds. This is the value that it's going to deliver, and we really know that. And if that is north of that number, then you should carry on the conversation. If it's not, to your point earlier, I think actually you should be challenging the customer to say, I don't think you have a need for this, and now's not the right time, because that's just the right thing to do. That's tomorrow's customer, right? At some point, that situation will change.
Yeah. And I think when you think about, and I love your explanation there, is trying to work out the need versus value, and And you need to be able to figure that out when you're proposing your solution, because
100%.
like that's where I like Medic or Medpick now, but Medic. So for back, I'm old school. So like it's because, and when I deliver training to my team and you know, even when I'm on sales campaigns, champion, I always start from the bottom. Champion is for the person who's got a win in it, and the first thing that they care about, or the thing you should both care about when you have a call, what's the pain? And once you've figured it out with you and your champion, that's the one person. Yes, you're very lucky if you've got multiple champions. But then the next piece is then you almost then go straight to the top of Medic, which is metrics, and you've got economical buyer. Well, so the metrics is exactly what you've just explained, right? Well, what's the economical value of the solution? What's the return on investment? Now, whether you can get there or you're not, you know, sometimes it's an operational benefit.
Yes.
You know, I'm in plenty of opportunities where it's an operational. We simply can't do this thing, and we can't do this financial accounting across 50 businesses. Okay, cool. Right. So, you know, the size of the problem is going to outweigh what it's going to cost because you simply can't do a major thing that you have to do as a business. You're like, okay, great. Is there an actual return? I don't know, but you can't do the thing. So the thing that you need to do might be in a spreadsheet. It's 20 people. It's too complicated. So, you know, you can easily see that the company's in a mess, and therefore a solution or something that's going to be systemized is going to solve that problem. But then the key thing is, who's the senior exec on a C level, whether it's a founder, a C level, an MD or a CEO, who's prepared to listen and care? Because it has to ultimately get to that level.
True.
You know, so that's where I always think you need to have multiple champions across multiple departments. If you can get there, you can't always get there. Sometimes it's strict buying processes. But the more champions you have and the more visibility you've got at a senior level with your solution, the more chances you've got. Then everything else on Medic, criteria and all that kind of stuff, that will just come later. But if you don't set the deal up in the right way with the right understanding for everyone involved, and also this might be 6 months, 12 months into a campaign, like that, those are kind of like the basics that have to be there.
Agreed.
It's critical.
Yeah, and I think within that ecosystem of, like you say, of champions and people aside, I think it's also understanding that sometimes we can accidentally be a threat to people and we don't necessarily realize it because we can have solutions at an enterprise level really solve problems for a business. I think sometimes we need to be acutely aware of there might be people involved in this who actually feel threatened by it. And ultimately, if you become a threat to one or multiple people, the other side of it, then, you know, I think the mistake I've seen often is that, you know, not every benefit is a benefit for everyone, if that makes sense. And I think often salespeople can become very evangelical about their product or their service. It's often how they've been onboarded. Like I said earlier, it's kind of like, this is why we're cool and awesome. Go and keep telling people this. But I have seen that. I used to work in an industry where we were selling products into businesses that drove energy efficiency, but also reduced facility management. Well, I had sales guys trying to sell to facility managers, of which we were taking some of their future workload away, which the CFO was excited about, but actually at facilities management level, we were creating redundancy for people in a business. And I think that often, again, by salespeople can get missed sometimes. And I think the time served ones kind of get that because they have a more sort of holistic view of the business. But we see people just being blunt force instruments sometimes with just, this is what we do. It's really good. It's really good. It's really good. So yeah, but it's actually not for this guy over here. And this guy is one of 3 people that are making, that's 30% of the vote. You haven't got it. And often that gets missed. They get so evangelical about what they do that they forget that they can actually be a threat. And let's be fair, we often don't buy from people that we consider threatening.
Well, no, of course. But also, like, if you're proposing a solution, like to, I worked in AP and P2P for a long time. And as part of that, you're taking out a lot of admin tasks.
Yeah.
Right. You could have, I remember one legal firm I worked with, there was about 15 or 16 admin tasks that were going to be taken out based on our solution. Well, I can tell you who doesn't want our solution in that organization. It's the 15 or 16 people that aren't going to have a job.
Yes.
So if you're communicating to those people, or even the manager that has really great relationships with those people, I can remember being in some meetings and thinking, apologize for the crude term. I have turkeys in this meeting who are going to be voting for Christmas.
Yes. Yep.
And I just thought this meeting is not going to land in the way it should do. We've got to be very cautious about how this is delivered. I remember changing the sales presentation and more talking about strategic objectives and talking about how it can transform the workforce to then focus on more strategic, important tasks, and it was a bit of a late save because the way that we were going to go into that presentation was, very different. And I think there's got to be a benefit to the organization.
Yes.
Right. But like a lot of solutions will be cost saving solutions.
Yes.
And it's also just being clear on what it is that you deliver.
Yeah.
It's great if you're revenue producing, right? Everyone wants to produce more revenue. But if you're cost saving, therefore you're taking people out, be very cognizant of how that affects people and teams, because they might love your solution. But if you're about to lose Janet, Ross, and John, who've worked here for 30 years,
yes,
then you're going to have some people who might not want that change.
Yeah. And that's where I think that I hate politics, well, broadly, but also in business. But I think as a salesperson, you have to acknowledge that it exists. It exists in every business. And on the other side of that conversation, there are politics in play. And which means that sometimes maybe they don't always make the logical decision because, we're emotionally driven as beings, and, we're big advocates that at the heart of everything is people's survival instinct. Therefore, they make decisions for avoidance of pain. And therefore, when you're putting potential job cuts and redundancies or budget cuts, and people see that as a threat, that's going to recall them as fast as anything. And I think the difference is, obviously with where you're at in your career, like you have the emotional intelligence to tune into that, right, and see that through business experience, through I know you've become a father over the last few years. Actually, that's probably one of the best things I've seen happen to some of the best salespeople I've had. They've become more emotionally tuned in to become more aware of what's going on. But without that, it's just a blunt force instrument, plug in features and benefits.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes with time and tenure.
It does, yeah.
Because like what we were alluding to at the beginning of this conversation, right, is if people grew up not having an idea that they were going to land in sales, right? No, I don't know anyone who wanted to be in sales as they kind of came through the ranks, went to university, went to college, etc. No, I don't know anybody. And most people say, I just fell into sales.
Yep.
And it's an amazing career. It can be a great career. Yes. It really can be. But that also means there's no real formal education or training.
No.
So the only way to learn how to be in sales is to be in sales.
Yes.
And then you learn by going through the ranks.
Agreed.
And that kind of means there are so many lives that you have as a salesperson, especially in the very beginning where you're just like, I remember my days picking up the phone, 120 calls, 100 calls, smash out the calls, try and get one meeting, trying to get one, hello, will you talk to me? Just on, but those days have gone. I mean, that was 2 decades ago. And now we're replaced with social selling.
Yes.
But we're also then replaced by, as you progress through your career, you're far more aware of the business impact and the people and the personalities. At the very beginning, you are selling features and benefits. Hi, do you want one of these? Have you got one? Do you want one? Because you don't know.
Yes.
You just don't have the awareness of what business is. And you kind of, to be successful in this career, you have to kind of go through all of those levels.
You do.
Yeah. And it's like, so training is a critical thing.
It is.
But experience is a critical thing as well. So you kind of got to go through these steps. Yeah. You can't fake it.
No, and I think the important part of that is having the backing of a ethical sales employer as well. And I think a big part of the issue we have in sales and actually where we see bad selling and unethical selling happening, actually I often believe that's not down to the individual. It's how they've been managed, it's how they've been recruited, it's how they've been incentivized. And I think unfortunately part of the reason why sales isn't a considered career choice is it's famous for chewing people up and spitting them out. And like you said, as a young salesperson, you end up in sales and hopefully you hit the lottery and you end up at a decent employer that's going to give you time, is going to give you education, is going to invest in your development to get the return on that further down the line. Unfortunately, there's lots of sales employees out there who don't give the gift of time or the gift of education or the gift of development. And it's just kind of, here's a phone, here's a laptop. You've got 3 months to make it rain. And if you don't, finding another job, pal. And that is unfortunately still, I think, is a big chunk of the sales market. And then that creates bad experiences for customers, but it creates bad experiences for the salesperson. And I think it's one of those careers that until you get to a level of maturity within it, it's quite a volatile career to be in. And then even I think when you get to a level of maturity, if you're working in a great business with great values, then it can start to feel more stable. But I think if you line up 100 salespeople and even sales leaders in here, most of them, not all of them, most of them would have, say that part of the issue of sales is living with the jeopardy of knowing whether they've got a job in 3 months, 6 months, which is someone going through life, certainly through 20s and 30s, and you're thinking about houses and kids and all this stuff. I think because of the volatility of it, that's another reason why people don't step into it.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's interesting because I think a lot about, what we've learned as we've gone through the last couple of decades or so and how sales has evolved and changed. I have a viewpoint which is there is no benefit in having a pressurized sales environment.
Yes.
I just think there's no benefit to it whatsoever. I know that's how it was years ago, and everything I do with my team now and what I believe is right is to give people time and support and collaboration and love and all that kind of fluffy good stuff, right? But almost as the exact opposite to how a sales team should be run or used to be run.
Yeah.
Because I feel like as soon as you put a load of pressure on people, they immediately start pressurizing the customer in some way. Yeah. And that starts to erode trust. And as soon as you start going into, but it's our end of month, it's our end of quarter, you're desperate.
Yep.
You're no longer helping someone solve a problem or are really focused on their business. You're now thinking about your business and when you need the money. And it just doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't.
Unless you're going to go into, which I don't ever recommend, hugely discounting end of month, end of quarter, end of financial year, which isn't good for anybody, just to start eroding your potential revenues. If you always focus on a higher value sale, which is clearly qualified, right, and it solves a business problem, the answers will just naturally come.
Agreed.
Right? You're solving a problem. They need to fix it by this. Okay, there you can forecast it. There we are. We are, at the right value point. And businesses, if you think about the impact for someone making a bad decision on any purchase, whether it's a small purchase or a big purchase, doesn't matter, but the impact of that committee, that team of people, and if they make a bad decision, they have to live with maybe a long-term contract, or they have to live with the fact they've spent company money in a way that maybe wasn't the best for them. The impact for the salesperson is we sold the deal. I got paid commission, right? Great.
Or kept my job.
Kept my job.
Yeah.
I kept my job. The impact for the buyer is so long-standing. We're just doing a project at the moment where they made an investment in technology 5 years ago. It's not worked out for them. They still had to pay for the contract, pay for the implementation fee, and now they've had to redo that whole tender. Which fortunately we've won, but that's 5 years of lost money and time on a solution that didn't work out for them. I'm talking multi more millions that's cost that business in terms of time, effort, people, so those sorts of decisions, they can't be taken lightly, and your end of month and end of quarter really don't matter to them.
No, I agree. But that's poor sales management, right? It's often sales leaders getting to a point in the quarter where they're behind the business, maybe FD, CFOs putting them under pressure to, you said you were going to ... And often poor sales leaders will just immediately push that down chain, and you hear, when you hear people say, just go and get it in, just go and get that across the line. I'll make it rain unicorn poo at the same time. If it's not the right thing to do. And like you said, that short-term approach of, and I've been on the other end of that. I guess weirdly had learned a lot about sales as a salesperson, as a sales leader, but actually 8 years running my own business and getting sold to a lot has been a really good education for me. And I've seen it. I've had people, again, month end, quarter end, one particular business whose name I shan't mention, but a software business who they came at us 2 or 3 days before the end of their quarter to try and get a piece of business across the line. That was 3 years ago. The issue they've got now is I don't value what they do at the price that they were previously presenting it at, because it's now the price they sold it to me at in the flash sale at the end of the quarter. So every renewal since, we've paid the same amount. Whereas if they'd have waited probably 3 weeks, they would have closed me at the full amount, and I carried on paying that full amount. So the cost to them actually compounded over a 3-year period is significant. And if you go discounting left, right, and centre to get deals across online, it just sets a new benchmark in the market of what your products and services are worth. You're almost never going to get back to where you were before, and I've seen that play out far too many times.
Yeah, I agree with you. So I feel like there should be. I feel like to change the perception of sales, like that would be one first thing, is just the culture of sales.
I think it's the biggest part of it.
It's the biggest part.
So how employers hire, manage, and train their salespeople is the solution to the wider problem.
Because what happens is a lot of salespeople, I think the average tenure in a sales 3 years, 2 to 3 years.
You know, it's less than 2 years for a sales director.
Wow. Yeah. So
I know that's at a different level, but but it starts there for me. Like if you've got that level of churn at that role, that creates uncertainty all the way down the chain, because you've got a lot of desperate sales leaders who are then enforcing these behaviors on their sales teams because they're fighting for their own survival. So again, although I don't respect the way in which they've behaved, I also kind of understand how it's come about, because again, there are organizations who, again, their expectations of their sales leaders often are not great. And it's probably akin to being a football manager, really. You can be a hero for a few years, but there are some environments where you're in a couple of quarters away from not being there anymore, and that's just no way to develop people.
You're right. It's exactly that. I love your analogy, because sales directors, I always thought it's about 18 months actually, so I thought it was less, but you probably 2 years, 18 months.
Yes, it's 1.8 years, which is halfway between the two, I guess.
Okay, so I was just guessing, but I've always looked at, when I moved into leadership, I thought, a bit concerned about this. It's a bit of it's where I want my career to go, but it's a bit of a poison chalice. I thought, God, am I going to be looking for a job every few years? And but the funny thing is, what that means is I find this a lot as I progressed further in my career, and I started talking to more senior leadership people, CEOs, CFOs, etc. And quite often I found you go into a role, and actually the expectation is unreasonable and unrealistic.
Completely.
We just expect sales to do this.
Yes.
I'm like, okay, well, has it ever been done before?
Yeah.
No. Okay, then where's your expectation coming from? Well, yeah, but our PE company says we have to get to this revenue.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, but you need double the size sales team and they've got no pipeline.
Yes. Yep.
They're like, okay, but so there's always like this expectation which is unreasonable and unrealistic. And I've found that in quite a few places now, probably going back a decade. So you come in as a sales director or head of sales, you've got a team that isn't ready to deliver this, but you can employ a couple more to make it. You're like, okay, and that's where I feel like this all happens. And what happens then is you then looking at how do we land grab revenue now, which gets us into this pressurized environment.
Short term.
So, but the funny thing is, if you can kind of just relax this a little bit. Like, we all need targets. We all going to be motivated and all that thing. But if we just think about the culture of developing people and think of it in that way, right? What actually, it'd be better if the sales director went in and said, look, I've reviewed the team. I've looked at the last 3 years of sales data, and actually my projected forecast over the next 12, 18 months, it looks more like this. I know we need to get to there, but it looks like this journey. That would be better than going in like, with these unreasonable, unrealistic targets, where you're just constantly just chasing your tail, which doesn't help anybody.
Yeah, and it's a difficult situation as well, because I think that, again, if you look at the typical profile of a sales director, given where they're likely to be age-wise and family-wise, you've probably got an individual there who has taken the new role. It's probably been oversold to them in an interview process.
Always, by the way.
Yeah. And then they get a month or two into that role. They realise that there's a big gap between the expectations of either whether it's a PLC or it's like a PE funded business who say we need to do X. There's in that moment where they realise that actually there's a gap here. And I think that puts that person in a very difficult position, because they've got a partner at home potentially they've got to go back to and say, if I actually go and start dropping truth bombs on this business, I might be looking for another job in 3 to 6 months. Or, I see this a lot, I've seen it with a lot of our geeks who are now the other side of it, but they end up adapting themselves to the environment and participating in this short term approach. But I think that having that pragmatic view of being able to go back to the business and be honest and manage upwards is that in its own right is a learned skill. And I think I'm a big believer that salespeople are chronically underinvested in. I think sales leaders are as well. So it's not often you meet sales leaders who have been promoted either through internally or through new roles, who've had any form of help and support really, certainly when it comes to like managing up and managing, I suppose, a peer level within the organization. They get the salesperson side of it, and they'll kind of broadly adapt to learning how to manage those salespeople. Some don't, most do. But actually, that internal management piece back is the biggest bit of the jigsaw that we see often is missed. But most sales leaders aren't trained, educated, and supported through that journey, because often they just need to deliver an output quickly because someone said so.
And that's the problem. That's the biggest challenge when we're looking at the sales leader, sales director, sales manager type position. It's because you end up being quite a lonely place, which is
very lonely. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got the expectations of a CEO or a CFO or however the reporting structure is, or a VP, and you've been brought in to do a job. But this is the really funny thing, is like then that first month or so you start doing the analysis and you're like, hang on a minute, some of these things don't add up.
Yes.
They don't make sense. And your ambition is bigger than your budget. I've just made that up, actually. I'm going to remember that.
No, but you're right. You're right. And the reality is there are, even beyond this, depending on the makeup of the business, something like, say, if it's a PLC or it's a business that has PE money in there, beyond the CEO, there's someone else who has an expectation of those numbers because they've been sold those numbers at some point. And then all that pressure just gets all the way moved down. And that's kind of, I suppose, in some respects, where I got to, and what ultimately led to me leaving the career behind and doing my own thing, because I got into a role where that happened. I realised within a few months that that was in a PLC, a North American PLC, that the gap between what was realistic and what they were telling me needed to happen based on what they'd sold back to, I suppose, the analysts that ultimately drive the share price in the PLC, the gap was huge. And I felt like I was carrying the burden of that for best part of a year, and it actually made me quite sick. Just walking around knowing that was a grenade that was going to go off at any minute. And it was a weird thing, because no matter how much I tried to realign expectations, there was always but if you could just, like, no, but I can't. Like, we were in a 2 to 5 year sales cycle as well, and then within the financial year, being told that we've got to create and convert opportunities within a financial year that we'd not carried into the year. And it was just one of those arenas where I'd say probably 85% of what we'd bill in a 12-month period, we carried in as pipeline from the year before, just because of the sales cycle. So you get odd bits in every year that would just kind of pop up, and but they were bonuses really. They were never anything you could budget on. And that was, being caught in that sandwich. And I think that's where, again, being a sales director, particularly being the guy or girl carrying the can for that figure, is a difficult place to be. And like I say, often people are in that place also at a time where personally they've got the pressure of, often raising family and for an expensive part of life. And that's where I think that those two things can collide. And I suppose that's, again, a big part of why we do what we do at Sales Geek and our franchise model, because there's, I suppose there's a lot of sales leaders out there that have been chewed up and spat out and don't want to go back around that merry-go-round ever again. And ultimately we create a home for them. But I cannot tell you, Simon, how many times I've sat across the table from someone who's become one of our geeks, at identical stories. And it's frightening how identical, how similar the circumstances are. And I suppose it's a thing that all of our people have in common. There's been a compelling reason why they've left that behind. And I think there are people like yourself working for good businesses who do things in the right way. I think, unfortunately, mate, that's the smaller part of the market. And where, as we sit here today, that they are in the minority of employers, I think, who do things the right way.
Let's talk about that year, because then we can talk into kind of how your career progressed. Okay. And of course, you founded your new business. Not so new anymore. It's been around for a long time. But that year where you kind of felt under pressure, you needed to perform, you're in a 2 to 5 year sales cycle, so almost impossible for you to deliver in year without just the existing pipeline. It's not your problem, it's not your fault. You're just there delivering the message and the number. Like, I know how lonely that place is. Like, talk me through, because that will affect your mental health, that will affect your family life, and we take it upon ourselves to try and just make that right and make it work.
Yeah.
And it's an awfully lonely, terrible place to be.
It
I've been
is.
in that a few times, and it's not nice. It's not a great place to be. But what was the impact for you?
Yeah, it was. I suppose in some respect, I look back on it now and I'm grateful for how bad it got, because it was. I suppose without that, maybe I'd have just carried on doing what I was doing. But it gave me a compelling reason to go on a different path. But yeah, I knew within 6 months of starting that role that I'd mainly grown up through SME. I was a young sales leader. I was 32 at the time, as a global sales director for a $300 million North American PLC. And I suppose in some respects it was the dream job. And I remember being offered that role and starting that role. And yeah, I guess the 18-year-old version of me would have said, that, dude, that's what you're aiming for. Like, get there. Got there, and got the rewards that come with it, and the stock options and all the stuff. And then there was a really weird moment, and it was only a few months, and I started to observe things, and I started to observe some people getting let go. They fired the guy that hired me. Well, I was told during my induction week in North America that they were going to let him go. He'd been at the company 18 years. So he hired me, and it was like, oh, he's going to be, and it was a cold nature in which it was like, we're going to be letting him go in a few weeks once you're back in the UK. I was like, oh wow, it was a bit of one of those, but I sort of carried on, and I just kept seeing things and seeing things and seeing things. And it was a strange thing, because I was kind of getting one message which was, giving you some freedom here and some budget here to build out a team. It's about long-term success and long-term growth from one person who was the chief exec of that business. But the other hand, with my other direct report, was the CFO saying, but this week, this month, this quarter. And I guess deep down, I knew pretty early that wasn't going to last forever, whether I jumped or whether I was pushed. I just kind of knew at some point there was going to come a point in that year where the business wasn't meeting its expectations to its shareholders, which ultimately in a PLC, that's almost the only thing that matters. And my head would be the price for that, whether or not I liked it or whatever I did in this 12 months. I knew I couldn't affect that number. It was impossible. It's a 2 to 5 year sales cycle. All we could do was maximize the conversion of the stuff that was in the pipeline and manage the timelines of getting that in when we could get it in. We're also recruiting new salespeople and bringing those people in. And I knew within a few months, although we'd started doing some really good things, we'd hired some really good talent into the team. I just knew. And then in the June or July, the Brexit referendum in 2016, and I was reporting back in Canadian dollars back to Montreal, and the pound dropped against the Canadian dollar significantly overnight off the back of the referendum. And I was told in no uncertain terms, the Canadian dollar target is still the target. So not only were we battling to get to a number anyway, I'm being told I've basically got to find an extra 30. It was 30 to 40% the currency that drops, and this was in the July on a calendar year sales year. What can I do? Like, I cannot make this happen. So I guess did what I normally do, which is like just get my head down and work as hard as I can and make the best of it. But at the same time, knowing over here that I felt like the end was inevitable. Like, I just knew at some point, because in those PLC environments, it's often, they would let somebody go not because of the cost saving, but because like what that suggests to the people that are holding them to account. So I guess in the August of that year, that had kind of built up, and I was away probably 3 weeks out of 4. My son was 2-3 years old at that point. I dragged my son and my wife from Buckinghamshire to Lancashire to live in a different part of the world. We're a single income family, and I guess we'd bought a house up there. Everything was in that, and what I earned popped up everything that we had, and I kind of knew that I was on a sticky wicket with all the dynamics of it. And I guess between being away, but also knowing at some point I might have to turn around to my wife and say, I haven't got a job anymore. Yeah, I got that kind of made me quite unhappy, I think it'd be fair to say. And I was really lucky actually at the point where that kind of got quite acute, and I was kind of sat there in this really weird headspace of, from the outside looking in, I'm in the process of achieving success by my own definition and by my friends, family. My mum and dad were really proud of the job that I had, and I hate it. I'm sat here, and hate's a strong word, as I'm not using it lightly. I hated it. But I remember sitting there thinking, well, if I leave, how's that going to look on my CV? Given where I'm at, what I'm doing, the level I'm at, I'm only ever going to go and do this in this type of role in possibly some bigger business again. Is it going to be the same? And all this internal dialogue in my head. And I was fortunate. I had a very timely conversation with a good friend of mine. I was down in London on business, and I met up with him for a coffee and just went, just spat it out, talked at him for 20 minutes, and I think summarized it with, I feel like this is a crossroads moment of, I either figure out a way to survive in this environment and stop being soft by maybe some people's definitions, or I live the rest of my life by my own values, and now's the time to break away and do something. And yeah, on the 7th of February 2017, I was independent for the first time in my employed life.
Yeah, it's always an amazing moment when you kind of decide that you're going to break away, or you just realize you just can't put up with it anymore. Like, you know, when you talk, I completely feel your story, like of just being, you're kind of trapped, right?
Yeah, it's a strange thing.
And I understand why you would define it as hate. It's because you do get to that stage where from the outside, it looks like you've got everything. Yeah. And the odd thing is, you talk about the 18-year-old version of you. The 18-year-old version of you has been working to achieve that role the whole time.
Relentlessly.
All that you know, the decade or so of training, education, selling, learning. And then you get the job, and then actually you realise that it's a totally different job. And you have these unreasonable and unrealistic people, and which you very quickly realise, you know, you can kind of get to hatred is a strong word, but you can get there. There's no question. Yeah. And then there's your family, your mental health. Yeah. You're like, hang on, there's this. It's everything.
It is.
You know, it's all going through your mind.
And I think, ultimately what helped at that point was, I know it's the old cliche, but like talking to people. And, you know, without that conversation with Paul, my friend in London, it was him that kind of said, well, that it's not an option to find a way to survive that. And and that was part of the inner dialogue, because I started to witness and see, and not just in that role. I was, prior to that role, the SME that I was employed by was bought out by a big European PLC, and so I'd had sort of a year of PLC life before I kind of stepped into the next round of PLC life. So at this point, I'm looking at this world going, I don't belong here. I don't feel like I'm willing to often behave the way some people need to behave to survive in some of those environments. And it was only through coughing that out to him that he just challenged me and said, you can't, you're 32, you're going to be working for at least the next 30 years. You think you can do that for the next 30 years? And I went, no, I don't. I'm actually worried about my own health and relationship with my son, my wife, and hobbies, friendships, all of the other very important parts of life that aren't this little thing called work. And it was him that said, well, okay, what are you going to do? And that was kind of when I sort of coughed out. I hadn't really thought about it properly. I had this sort of thing of like, I'm a sales leader, I'm a sales director. I've been doing that in big business or big-ish business. And I'd love to go and do that for a bunch of small businesses because I think they really need the help and they can't afford me and I can't afford them. But maybe if we do it in a different way, we can make that work. And he said, well, why do you care about that? And we had this whole conversation and I hadn't thought about it before, but then realized that I kind of grew up in a family of a failed business. And so I know what it's like and every business in that stat of failure, which is ridiculously high, there's collateral damage behind that. There's a broken household, there's damage. And I'd grown up in that environment. My dad, I suppose when I was probably sort of 7 or 8 years old, grew up in a working class environment. He was a mechanic and he wanted to try and improve our circumstances. So we had to go, and ultimately that business failed. Knowing what I know now, I could have helped my dad. Or even at 32 years old, I could have gone back to the 8-year-old version of me and helped my dad. So I had this real passion for how do I take what I've learned what I know and make that accessible to small businesses, because it wasn't. There was no fractional sales directorship in the UK really at that point. And even now, with any people really doing it at scale, and even a lot of the consultants in the arena primarily were trying to aim at the bigger businesses so they could get bigger day rates for what they were doing. And I said, oh, why don't we build a business that appeals to the 93% of the UK economy who can't afford a full-time sales director? And I guess had some belief that there was a need for that. Difficult conversation. Well, actually, what I thought was going to be a difficult conversation with my wife, which wasn't in the end. I remember speaking to her for the first time about it. I was terrified because you play these conversations out in your head first, right? And I'm like, okay, so I'm about to explain. So we've just bought this house. We're in Lancashire. She wasn't working at the time because just before Ellis started school, and yeah, she knocked me off my feet, but she knew it was coming. She knew I was unhappy, and she was great. She said, like, whatever you need to do, do it. I back you, believe in you. If anyone's going to make it work, you are. And if it goes belly up, I don't care what house we're living in and whether we've got a car or not. As long as the three of us are together with the dog, we're happy. And it just kind of that took all the pressure off me that I'd put on myself in the previous 12 months, and yeah, stepped foot into the world of unemployment on the 7th of February. Had 4 months worth of mortgage payments and beans on toast money in the account. When it was gone, it was gone. Unfortunately, found some customers during that time, and I guess the rest is history. Still here to tell the story.
Amazing. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing story. Like, firstly, well done your wife, because
Yeah.
like without that, you know, because she could have changed and she could have said anything in that time, but without her unwavering support to you, to give you the confidence and the freedom to go and do something, we might not be sat here right now.
Agreed.
Right. And you would have maybe gone to a different role, or, you know, so just having that, a supportive partner, is probably the pillar of this story where it starts from.
Well, and she's carried. I mean, it was funny because when we, it kind of coincided with my son starting school, and so Lucy went and took a part-time job, just so we had some money coming in, and then yeah, we got into that first year, and I was busy with doing client delivery, and like most sales guys, I'm not great at admin, so when it comes to invoicing and bookkeeping and all that sort of stuff, and she said, oh, I can do that. Why don't I do that? And I looked at it and went, well, if that frees me up one extra day a month to go and work with more clients, it's probably going to offset what she's earning. I think so. In the 9 months in, I suppose at the end of that first year, she come and joined the business, and she's doing the business now. Sits on the board of directors. I think she's done every job in the business. She's been our people person. She's been our finance person. She's been our admin. She's done everything in the business, and she hates the limelight, so she's going to hate the fact that I'm even talking to you about it, actually. But she's one of a few unsung heroes in our business, and it's been great going on that journey together. Because again, I think in former life, I had such a separation between work life and personal life that it was kind of, now looking back, I find it weird having these two things that were completely separate from each other, and now they're just completely merged into one existence, and us working together in the business is a big part of that. And my son comes in most half terms for a day or two. His friends are other people's kids in our business, and it's just a very different way of living. But the big part of that is going on that journey together as a husband and wife team, and still being married for 8 years into 8 years into running a business together. I think that's probably a minor miracle in its own right.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing to have a real deep relationship, which is personal and in business life as well, because that's very rare.
Yeah,
it's very rare to have that.
Yeah, I get it's probably one of the most there's certain questions naturally as a running a sort of scale up business you get asked from time to time, but I do get asked a lot about it. What's it like being in business with your wife? And weirdly, it's had the opposite effect, I think, to what most people would think it would do. It's actually brought us closer together. It's a big part of our lives that we now share, whereas before I was doing 60, 70, 80 hour weeks, not wanting to share that back into my personal life whatsoever. I was doing my best to create separation and kind of leave it over here. And yeah, it's been a fun ride. We've both learned a lot and grown a lot through the last 8 years.
Yeah, incredible. Talk me through what I'd love to know more about. It's just those first 4 months you talked about, where you've got some beans on toast money, but I always think that's the trepidation moment of, am I going to? Because you don't, at that point, you made a huge decision, a really positive decision as well, but a huge decision. And now you're going to try and create a new business model, which you don't know if it's going to work. But the only way to do it is to do it.
Yeah.
You got 4 months of money. Like, talk me through those 4 months and how you set it up and then started reaching out.
Yeah, so the early part was obviously you're full of excitement at the beginning, and I remember being at home on the 7th of February and kind of there was a bit of like have a glass of cheap prosecco because that's what we can afford, and then wake up the next morning going, right, it's time to go to work, and I suppose the first thing was that realization of there's a lot of things I needed that have been provided for me in the past. And some of that stuff you kind of start writing your list out pretty quickly, right? Okay, well, we need a logo, need a website, I need a mobile phone. I've always been providing one of those for a company. I need a laptop. I need stuff. And then there's also the stuff that you don't know about. And I remember really, really vividly the moment where the first customer said yes. And it was like, yeah. And it was a Friday evening. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. This guy's come back to me and gone, yeah, we'd like to take some services from you. And I was like, yes. And it wasn't enough to pay ourselves, but it was enough to stop the money kind of declining down quite as far. So it was kind of buying us time. And I remember sitting there at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, because his exact words were, yeah, just fire us over the invoice. I know you're new into business. Fire us over the invoice. I'll get you paid. He was such a good guy. It's just like, I know it's important for you to get paid. So like, just send us the invoice. Great. I sat there and thought, invoice? What, how do you make an invoice? I mean, as a salesperson, sales lead, I've been responsible for the distribution of many invoices over the years. I've never built one. I've never written out an invoice or thought about an an invoice template. And then I had to go online, Googled it, obviously, like you do, and invoice templates, of which there's loads of free templates online. And then the thing I procrastinated the longest over was what number to put on that first invoice.
00001.
Exactly right. Now, although I knew that he knew that he was my first customer, there was the part of the ego part of the brain saying, oh, you still can't write 00001. So I ended up coming up with some weird combination of numbers that I understood, and it would then start a sequence of numbers for however many invoices we've now sent 8 years on. So there's a lot of that stuff, like doing things for the first time, which was fun. It was exciting. You obviously don't want to make yourself look silly, so you care. And I think that's the thing, like the amount of care in every single thing. You feel like every tiny little detail about everything that you choose to do may or may not be the difference between surviving and not surviving. And when you kind of got that cliff edge at the end, that's very real. So it kind of it definitely consumes you. But I think weirdly, I remember getting towards the end of the first year, to the end of our first year, sitting down with the accountant and sort of went through and sort of tallied things up and had a look at it. And it was only at that moment then that and this is going to sound really irresponsible, by the way, that I realised that we came within 3 weeks of running out of cash. I didn't even know. I came away from that meeting going, oh, that was quite sobering. And Lisa was like, yeah, well, I knew that. And like, so I genuinely was in my own little bubble of being passionate about what we were doing, and really cared about, and I wanted to find customers, I wanted to help people really, rather than finding customers just to generate the income. And the way that I've described it is we've got our little boy's 12 now, but I remember like when he was first born and being a parent to a newborn, where again, you're in this kind of like weird bubble where you've not had enough food, you've not had enough sleep, but and time goes by in this routine, and that it was the most similar thing to that I've been in. Where, and I suppose in some respects we were birthing our then youngest child, which was Sales Geek, and I suppose the one thing I'd said to myself was, there's elements to building a business and building a value proposition and a product and pricing, everything, which requires some intelligence and some smart thinking. So obviously we want to get as much of that stuff right as we can, but what I'm not going to do is fail through lack of effort and lack of activity. And I was relentless in, one of our biggest weaknesses really was I'd lived in Lancashire for 3 years, had no business network in Lancashire. I'd worked in the same market vertical for 10 years. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go out and engage with this local business network. And I'd never heard of most of the networking events or chambers of commerce, any of that stuff that I'm now fluent in. And I guess my way of fixing that problem was just go at it hard. And I was, lots of early starts, lots of late finishes, lots of networking, lots of social events. Just, I was at everything all the time. Because I felt like if I got 4 to 4 months and it hadn't worked, I had to be able to look myself in the eye and know that I'd given it absolute effort. So yeah, and I think that in some respects, through certain phases of business, for all of the working smart and applying intellect and stuff like that, sometimes you just need brute force. You just need activity. You just need to go and do that. And I've always been a great believer that whatever your algorithm is for sales success, at the end of that is times activity. And if that's zero, whatever is at the early part of that formula, it equals zero. If that's zero, it doesn't matter. All this other stuff becomes irrelevant. So yeah, just went hard at it. Did a lot of refining. It's funny coming from a sales environment. It's so different when you're then writing your own copy on your website and trying to figure out how to articulate the thing that you're going to do. So I was constantly going out, networking, speaking to people at events, coming home, rewriting a copy on the website, rewriting a copy on social media, and going through that refinement process. And then, yeah, we found the first one, and then sort of second, third, fourth client came on board. And by the September, I pretty much had a full diary, and which then brought about the different challenge, which was what next. But yeah, it was fun, and I've got lots of fond memories of it. But a lot of it's a blur.
Yeah. But also, like, the first time you got that order, a completely different situation for you. When you're selling, when you're in a big corporate, you're selling someone else's product, you didn't create it, you're selling it.
Yeah.
Getting in an order, that's great, right? That's good times. But you created the product and you sold the product.
Yes.
Like, I bet that it's a totally different win.
It is. And also, it's double. I think it's hard to quantify this really, but the emotional aspects of that is, let's say you've created a product. I've always sold other people's products really. So I've created a service, but also part of what they're buying is me.
Yeah.
So it's that double emotional thing of when someone says yes, you feel accepted. It's like you feel like, okay, well, people want, not only do they want this, but they want me. And there's, I suppose, some of the voices in my head when I was first starting was, as well as having to go and meet a lot of people for the first time, because I didn't have anyone to just pick up the phone to and any chances and work power. I didn't have that network locally. And I had some people, I suppose, down in the southeast, but if I was commuting back to the southeast, I might as well have stayed in my job. But there is that little bit of imposter syndrome of, I was 33 years old. I'd only really been a sales director for a couple of years, and I just launched this business called Sales Geek, and the strapline was your sales director. And I was a 33-year-old guy who had only been a sales director for a couple of years. And there was that inbuilt fear of, are people going to accept me and my experience? So when you get those first couple of yeses, the value of those yeses is so far beyond the invoice number. It's a, like, the relief of, okay, we've got a chance. And even at that point, it's still only a chance, because you've still got to repeatedly and consistently find customers, retain those customers, and build the business. But those first few yeses, it's hard to, I think it's quite hard actually to fully articulate the value of those first couple of yeses in that type of situation.
The sort of engagements initially that you were sort of commissioned or worked on, how did that sort of manifest itself? Because you'll be working on behalf of these sort of SMB type companies. Yeah. They can't afford a full-time sales director, right? Yep. Such as yourself with plenty of experience and like the 10-year, growing, and then all that kind of stuff. And then so how would you be servicing those companies to ensure, because your job then still is to work to deliver revenue for someone and create either the messaging or whatever. So how did that work? Because you've had to do that for your own business. Now you're doing it for someone else's business.
Yeah. Well, but the added benefits that was I was learning about my own business every time I was working in somebody else's as well. So we would, so I suppose we don't, and I've never done sort of the selling, if that makes sense. We're there as a sales director. So some of those really, really small businesses, that might be as little as half a day a month, which is very, sitting like this in this environment, very advisory. It's quite strategic. And it's kind of working on it from a distance, right the way through to business that we work with maybe a day, maybe up to 2 days a week, but typically like a day a week. And they will have some sales infrastructure. So that's about inheriting what's there, looking at it, improving it, driving change going forwards. So yeah, I guess if I go back to like September 2017, I got to a point where I had a good client book, I had stuff coming in. Everything we did then was retained, and broadly still is now actually, even with the training stuff. We don't do one-off stuff. It's we believe in that's a bit of a cliche thing, a journey there you have to go on. And yeah, but I suppose I was probably working in 6 or 7 different businesses. I had sort of 2 or 3 that I was doing a few hours a month with, and a couple that I was doing a day or 2 a week with, and then sort of 1 or 2 that I'd do a day a week for. And yeah, that was quite interesting, switching the brain between different businesses. But I think what I definitely proved to myself in that period of time was one of my beliefs when I was starting Sales Geek was that sales problems are far more universal than people give them credit for. I think in sales, people overvalue industry experience and kind of relevant experience at that level, whereas actually, and I see it even in the hiring and firing process of salespeople and sales leaders, most businesses will prioritize industry over almost everything else. So you get great sales leaders that haven't got industry experience won't get hired. You get mediocre sales leaders with industry experience, they often get hired. So I wanted to prove to myself that my understanding of the science and the psychology of sales could work in different environments. And I think back to even that first year, that just how diverse some of those businesses were, those early customers, and applying what I believe to be my truth into those businesses and seeing it working was a huge confidence builder in not just having people saying yes to me at the front end, but retaining those clients for a level of time which suggested that it very much worked. Seeing results, seeing income growth, seeing them scale and build their own business was hugely rewarding and became quite addictive actually. But it was difficult because again, like I said, I got to that September, it was great. By the time I got to Christmas, sort of coming back from the Christmas break, business is coming round to its first birthday, I was already sat there going, well, like, what happens now? Because yeah, I'm pretty confident that I could maintain my own book of customers, but I'd always said in my business plan, 33 years old, I don't want to be a self-employed sales consultant for the rest of my life. We created a brand and a business which meant we could grow and scale, but I hadn't line for line detailed exactly how. And yeah, I locked myself away in a room for a few days that would have been sort of February 2018, and came up with some ideas. And yeah, I guess even then I believed. I think belief can get you quite a long way. And obviously as a business, we spend a lot of time with people building out plans that are quite detail orientated and focused. But I think when you're early enough, when you're so early, anything that's in that plan, most of it's made up. Like you guessing at what's possible, really. So at the core, was it line for line? No, it wasn't. Did we have absolute belief in a future state where we could have a sales geek in every business community in the UK? Was our initial goal, and that subsequently changed to some international territories. Yeah, I did. If people are going to consume me and my time here in Lancashire, why wouldn't they consume someone's time in Manchester or Leeds or Reading or London? Then there's 5.3 million SMEs in the UK, chronically underserviced by people that have gone before me in our market. And I suppose the challenge then was, how do we resource that? How do we get access to the talent to go and help those people? Which initially for the next few years we sort of scaled the business out locally. We hired people just through being out and visible locally. Had enough people come to me and say, this looks like really good fun. Can I come and do this and help your clients out? I was like, yeah, great. Then go back to Lucy and sell her on that. Kind of go, I've just met this guy. He's great. And he could definitely go and deliver either this product or that product, and customers are going to love him. And she'd be like, yeah, but how can we afford the salary? Like, oh, it's fine. I'll go and get some of his time sold. And you kind of like wheeling and dealing and trying to offset, increasing cost base, increasing customer base at the same time. And I was in the middle of that. And we organically grew it out pretty much to when COVID hit in 2020. We had a team of 10 of us. 80% of our revenue was coming from within Lancashire broadly. And we locally grew a brand that was recognised for what it did and picked up some awards, and things were great. And then COVID came and gave us a big slap around the face like a wet fish.
The reality of business and the reality of life taking us all into a new direction.
It was brutal initially. Again, knowing what we know now, to sort of go back and go, chill, it'll be all right. But in that moment, we'd invested everything. Any profit and cash we'd generated had just gone back into people, product development, office space, We weren't taking out money from the business really. We were paying ourselves what we needed to earn, and the rest of it was going into to building a business. So obviously then when COVID hit and Boris said, can you go home for 3 weeks? At that point, 100% of our income was predicated on an employed member of my team physically sitting in a room with somebody. People weren't using Zoom or Skype. Everyone was Skype back then. Teams. It was, and actually there was a couple of clients that we had that were further away, London, all the way up in Aberdeen, where it's like pre-COVID. We even gone to them and said, if we can do some of these sessions online, guys, we can save you a chunk of cash from what you're paying us at the minute. No, we want to do it. And that was a world that we live in. People wanted face to face. So inevitably, we were sat at home that first week thinking, what happens now? We've got a team of employees on our payroll and they can't go and see customers, right? So we transitioned a number of customers onto Zoom sessions, but we also chose to do what we believed the right thing, which was me and my wife, we approached every single client on a phone call and gave them an opportunity to pause their contract with us, because if they were having the same cash flow conversations as we were, we wanted to offer that to them rather than them coming to us. It was the right thing to do, but also it gave us a meaningful cash flow conversation to have ourselves, because up until that point, we didn't know what was and wasn't going to stick. So we just got brave and picked up the phone and had those conversations and gave people an out to just pause things while they were dealing with their own stuff, right? Because everyone was in chaos and you're trying to run a business, but you have to be appreciative that so are a lot of other people, and there's lots of other people were our customers. So we did. We successfully wrote off 75% of our income in about 2.5 days. I went cold then just saying that out loud. And it was hard, but it was the truth. And you can deal with the truth. Going back to what we said earlier about sales and forecasting and stuff like that, is at least you know what it is. What's worse than not knowing what it's going to be, and you can't plan for that. So that gave us a basis to plan from. But then in the end, it ended up being a gift, because it gave us a bunch of time back to explore further this thing called franchising that we'd literally started talking about in the February of 2020, about that is that a credible way to grow and scale. But we were so busy, like we were maxed out. Like I say, at the point we hit COVID, we'd gone from in the space of 2 years, we've gone from being a one-person business essentially, with Lucy doing the stuff behind the scenes. All of a sudden, we got a team of 10 of us. We're sort of doing 80, 90K months in revenue. And this thing had all this momentum, and all of a sudden it just went, oh. But the thing we were starved of was time, and COVID and the lockdowns and stuff gave us time to kind of revisit some of those growth strategies. And one of those was franchising.
I think that's the one thing that COVID did for everybody. It was a great reset.
Yeah.
It was a reset, a rebalancing, and able to kind of rebuild. I mean, the thing is, it was unknown for everybody. No one knew what was going to happen.
No.
We've never been in that situation before. There was no one had ever been through it. Possibly, hopefully, we'll never go through it again.
Yeah,
it's a one-time thing.
We'll better equip this. If it happened again, I think people would manage it very differently, because.
I had never used Zoom before. And and every meeting, I remember up to that point in sales, everything was about getting a customer facing meeting, customer facing demo. If you get the meeting, that's the big thing. And then suddenly I'd never sold anything over Zoom before until that point. And I remember at that point we acquired a company, and they had that, funny enough, they'd only been selling over Zoom.
Right.
And since the inception of their business, they were 4 or 5 years old. And I always remember having a real closed mindset to that will never work. It will never work. It will never, there's no way this will ever work. Like I'm too ingrained with, you have to meet the customer and shake their hand and everything else. How wrong was I? So, very quickly, we moved on to Zoom, and I remember the pipeline I had and the team that I had at the time. Everything adapted a few weeks later, a few months later. I was doing some work with Deutsche Bank at the time, and they said, we've been trying to do this digital transformational project for about 5 years. And then they said, then over a weekend, 100,000 people started working from home, and we just made it happen. And so businesses just they just transitioned.
They do.
But they just did it at rapid pace, and everyone, within a month or two, it kind of became like a new normal. And I must admit, I remember going, this is great. It's the first I've ever had time. So it's interesting to see how your business reset itself. And then you started to look into franchising.
Yeah, we'd had the conversation probably in the February of 2020. So kind of like at the point where COVID was still this thing that was happening in a different part of the world. And although I think we all kind of knew it was coming, there's part of your brain kind of hoping that it might not. So we were sort of carrying on as normal. And we'd had the conversation actually as a board. We'd agreed that it's something we're going to do. We'd engage with someone that could help us go through the process of building out operations manuals and franchise contracts. It's all very boring doing that stuff, but it requires time, which was something that we were short of at that point in our journey. And obviously then COVID hit, and then kind of like we'd written off the revenue, having cash flow conversations, and it was just a chat. I think it probably about 2 weeks into lockdown, and like most people, having a quiz on a Friday afternoon and a couple of beers with colleagues, and me and my colleague James, who's a shareholder director in the business, we sort of held back after one of those quiz sessions, and I just speculatively said to him, like, we got a quote sat on the table to go and get all this work done with somebody, and I suppose part of my brain was thinking, just hold on to every penny of cash we've got, because it would be really reckless to let anything leave the business that wasn't a necessity. But then the other part of my brain was thinking, I wonder if we get a better deal at the moment. Wonder whether that guy needs some business and he maybe can offer us some better payment terms, or maybe there's an opportunity here to A, build this out cheaper than we thought, B, actually build it out, because of now the people who were most needed to build it out, especially the operations manual, which is basically a book on how to run your business, also busy in client delivery. So we'd solved that. Well, COVID had solved that problem for us. So yeah, we went back to them and they said, yeah, something's better than nothing. And we kind of sat around, and the bet that we placed, and I kind of feel bad saying this because I think it's a complete indictment of the conversation we had earlier about how sales leaders get treated. I remember sitting there, and obviously we're going to invest in building out this franchise model, and also what we need at the end of that is for some people with the right level of experience, sales leaders, to want to come and invest in a franchise and start their own business and leave behind the security of a full-time job, which we knew for the first few that was going to be a massive ask, because it's an unproven model other than what we've been doing in Lancashire. And we knew that we were going to have to find a special group of people that were willing to be the pioneers, I guess, of that. And I'm really, I think now looking back to those people that joined us in the first year, they're all still here and they're growing and they're thriving and living their best life running the business. And it's amazing. But at the time, the bet that we placed was, it's not a good bet, because part of me wants it to be wrong, actually, was that if there was ever a time that particularly big businesses would show their true colors in their management and their treatment of their sales leaders, it's going to be now. So if there's ever a time where there's going to be some really good people who have been mistreated and possibly shifted out onto the scrap heap, it's going to be at the end of whatever's coming next. And that was basically the bet that we placed, was that if there was ever a time to have those conversations, it was going to be probably towards the end of 2020. So we've got a few months. Let's build this stuff out. Let's be brave. And we did. Some people would say it was reckless. It cost us probably 2 months of survival fund of how long we had to survive to go and do that. So it shortened our life expectancy without any new revenue coming in. But I think we're just inclined to go down swinging if we're going to go down. And it's better to do it that way, I think, than kind of die a slow, painful death. So we did. And yeah, fortunately for us, we were right on that. And I don't take any pleasure in that, because the people that had very difficult year, we'd had a difficult year, obviously. Although the mad thing was, after about a month of going into lockdown, the whole world just came back at us. Almost all of those clients that had taken the pause come back to say, we need your help more than ever. We had a bunch of new inquiries. We, for the first time, invested in things we couldn't previously afford to invest in, even looking at PPC. All the big customers left the market, so the cost per click on sales training for PPC dropped off a cliff. We opportunistically stepped in for a few months while they were fast asleep, saving cash, acquired a load of new training contracts, which we still doubled our turnover from the year before during the COVID year. And we just took our opportunities, right? And and we got busy again really quickly, and we were re-recruiting by the time we got to June, July, because the whole world was saying, how do we sell now? I've got salespeople at home, we've got customers we can't go and see. What do we do? Our whole sales model that we used to have isn't relevant anymore. So how do we go and do it? Which was fortunate for us, and I guess that's now given us the belief going on that actually a bit of economic uncertainty in some respects is not a bad thing for us. And yeah, I suppose we found a couple of willing guinea pigs who were willing to come and be our first couple of franchisees. We then piloted it for 6 months through the back end of 2020, which obviously was a strange time because we're in and out of lockdowns and restrictions, and you can't do this and you can't do that. And then in March 2021, we properly launched it in the UK. And yeah, that we it's always hard at the beginning because there's always a bit of herd mentality, and it's easier to recruit new franchisees when you've got 30, 40, 50 franchisees than it is when you've got two. But we did it, and it was a lot of hard work, and lots of conversations, lots of rejection, lots of people that were going to do the safe thing, which I fully get. But we didn't need hundreds. We just needed a few willing people to be those early adopters. And yeah, if I look back at where we are now in the UK, I'm really proud of where we've got to. But yeah, that first year of bringing these guys in, and then and then also having to take our internal team on this big transition from, we had a group of people who were, I'd say, had a team of 12 or 13 at the end of 2020, of which 10 of us were selling and delivering services. Now we weren't really going to be delivering. Well, we knew we were going to get to a point we weren't delivering services anymore. Our franchisees would be delivering them, and we had to take this team of people and redistribute them into roles around the business, which meant they were supporting franchisees who were doing the delivery and the sales rather than doing it ourselves. And yeah, that was a challenge at times because people had joined us to be sales trainers or joined us to come and do things, and we're kind of sort of saying we're not going to be doing that. We're going to have a fleet of people in the field doing that. So that's triggered a lot of change over this subsequent 4 years, but it's unlocked our capacity to scale fast in the UK, but ultimately then scale internationally as well. It's been a great model for us.
What I love that you're doing with sales directors is you're directly, if you think about the problem we talked about earlier, where you're often in a situation where you're maybe slightly oversold the role, short tenures as a sales director, anything, let's say anything between a year and a half to 2 years, something along those lines, let's say 2 years. So a short sales career in a lot of roles, unreasonable and unrealistic expectations and targets. And how you're solving that for a sales director, right? You've got knowledge, expertise, all those sorts of things. Is you're allowing them to run their own business using their knowledge and expertise, but without the unreasonable and unrealistic expectation on a CEO who's trying to float the business or try and reach a certain goal, or they're trying to sell or whatever they're trying to do, and actually probably work with people who can be far more reasonable because they're really grateful of finally we're selling something.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the transition, seeing a lot of people now going out transition from, I don't think there's many, we've got 60 odd geeks now in different countries, and I can think of maybe one or two who had any level of involvement in their local business community before they started their Sales Geek business. They've lived in a town, some of these guys, for their whole life, never done business there. And now they're kind of these valuable members of this community. They're involved with local sponsoring grassroots clubs and charities, and they've got clients that are in walking distance to their front door, and seeing, and they've now sat on boards of chambers of commerces, and all of a sudden their existence where they live is completely different to what it was before, which was generally quite anonymous. Really, they did have friends and family and whatnot, but they had no connection to it. And seeing that's been amazing, and really the pressure is theirs to create in terms of they'll get the success from it that they put into it, and I'm not ever going to sit here and go it's an easy thing to go and do, because they've got to go and do the work, even like within the model. But seeing people get through that first year and getting to a point, and I remember vividly sitting there in the September of that first year when it was the first moment where I sat there and went, and it was a real kind of moment of, even if 2 or 3 of these customers fire me tomorrow, I can still afford to pay my bills. You can never say that in an employee role. You've either got it or you haven't got it. And I think what I feel like I've come to realize through 8 years of doing this and 4 years of taking on a lot of the people through the journey is that I think the concept of job security is a bit of an oxymoron in 2025. I really do. Whereas actually, like I look at one of our average guys, got a business, got several customers, creating the income that ultimately pays their salaries, with the ability to dial that up when they want to dial it up, dial it down if they want some quiet. Like they've got autonomy over that, and controlling it. And obviously, it's scary. Starting a new business is scary. It doesn't work for everyone. But the value that gives, both in the short term, but also then, like you said, like when you're in a role, you don't know when the business. I worked in a business that got acquired. It wasn't what I signed up to when I first took the job. It changed my whole life, and I didn't want it to happen, really, if I'm being honest. But it was the right thing for the owners. But that was the moment I realized it's always going to be theirs. It's not mine. No matter how passionate I get, how much I care, how hard I work, it's theirs. It's not mine. Whereas like the way our model works with the franchise model with exclusive territories, we want people to grow and scale a business that's actually got some value. Nothing would please me more if in 5 years from now, one of our guys who's built out a team of replicate what we did in our first 3 years, built out a team of 6, 7, 8 deliverers, turning over 1.5 million quid, generating some decent profitability at the bottom of that, gets a nice valuation on it, and retires. That is my dream is to see that happen time and time and time and time and time again, because there is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for most of these guys in the roles that they're in. They're working tirelessly, taking all the risk in terms of if the wind changes direction, I'm going to get out here, with no real upside other than just getting paid and getting a bonus every quarter or whatever. But there's no real upside. So that's been fun, seeing that and seeing the transition that they go on. But it's not always smooth sailing, because no matter how unhappy someone's got where they were, they've still developed the coping mechanisms to deal with those stresses, and then take someone out of that environment and go, here's this thing which is going to be new and shiny and exciting for a while. Then the reality is going to set in that you've got to sell and you've got to generate customers and deliver good value to your customers. And then you've got the challenges of building a team and bringing people in. It's a whole new set of stresses there. There's a whole new set of things that they have to worry about that they didn't have to worry about over here. And again, we have to really carefully manage people through that transition. Things I never thought of: corporation tax, personal income tax on dividend, just stuff that for maybe 30 years of their career they've never had to think about. And it sounds like little things individually, but it's a very different way of living. And yeah, that's a big part of our role, I guess, as the franchisor, as HQ, is to support people on that transition from what they've known for a long time for a lot of these guys to living in a very different way. But moreover, servicing their communities, and that's the fascinating thing, seeing the businesses that they unveil and unpick and find in these communities, and making what we do accessible to that community is very fulfilling, actually.
Yeah, I can imagine. For a sales director that's listening today, thinking, I'm deeply unhappy, I'm frustrated with this role, I'm traveling all over the place, I'm unhappy with the targets, the numbers, I know I'm probably 6 months away from something happening. What do you think? Like, that level of unhappiness. I mean,
Yeah.
You just used the word hate earlier. I don't know, when you get to that level of leadership, do you love it? Not many, I don't think. You're there because you've got obligations, and also you set up a level of life yourself. That's also the
Status.
status. It's the natural next progression of your career.
Well, let's be fair as well. Often for most people, the more money they earn, the more debt they take on. So the more tied into being in that type of role at that level they are, because they can't afford to step out of it, because they've got a bigger mortgage, they've got cars to pay for, they've got there's this monthly overhead that needs servicing every month. And I think the further you get into that, the harder it is to get to step out of it.
Yeah, I see that a lot. Yeah. So if someone's in that world today, talk me through what's the world that you're offering to them, because this is probably, if someone's come this far on our podcast on the journey, they'll be thinking, I'd like a piece of that. Some of what you're saying is exciting to get, because you're talking about freedom, but also utilizing your deep expertise that you've got in a way that's going to help businesses, and for you to work, you use your skills in a more conducive way in some respects. So I'd be interested to see, so that person that's frustrated today, what could their world look like if they made the leap or considered the leap?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is, for any of our guys is, and was for me personally, is fulfillment. So fulfillment, sense of purpose, autonomy, and I think feeling like you're contributing in a different way. And I think that if I look at our most successful sales geeks, they're the guys that care the most about what they do for the people they do it for. They have a real passion and energy in because the reality is these small business owners that we step. I mean, we do sales training for some big companies too. That's a smaller percentage of what we do. Most of what we do is probably 70% of what we do every month is fractional sales direct services into small businesses. These are real people. These are real people who are living with the worry of their business and generating income and how they're going to pay their own mortgage and pay their staff, and wondering how they can have no idea how to sustainably and consistently generate income into their own business. Often founder-led businesses, a founder is out the only person maybe generating the revenue, or they've got a few sales guys. And I love that situation. We get a sales training inquiry comes in and they want some sales training for 4 or 5 salespeople that the founder turns out is managing. They don't want to manage salespeople. If you're an engineer running an engineering company or a coder managing a tech business, you don't want to be managing salespeople. And the relief that comes to them when they know that there's a solution that means they don't have to do those things anymore is enormous. And that the currency of that for me was far greater than the financial currency. And yes, you have to earn money. Yes, it's a commercial enterprise. But the feeling of giving value to the point where, the softer side of this is going to Sainsbury's on a Sunday morning and getting hugged by old customers. I know it sounds like a daft thing to say, but I don't remember that happening in my, in what I did before. But the impact that you can make on people is significant. So I think they're the main things for me. The fulfillment from what we do, the autonomy in terms of the day-to-day of not having to put a leave application in to go to your kid's sports day anymore. You don't have to worry about whether you can take that week off. You forgot to put the leave application in, but you've told your wife you have, and she's already booked the holiday, and now you're not sure whether you can take the week off work, and getting battered to death on the phone while you're on holiday because no one cares that you're on holiday, and actually taking control of your own destiny from that perspective, but also then the excited by the upside of building a business and creating some real value, building a team and going on that journey. And it's a different type of hard. I think that they always say, don't you choose your hard. It's like going to the gym's hard, but so's not long term. And I think it's the same kind of in this environment. The comfy thing might feel to just stick it out, see it out, get the regular income. But when I look at where the vast majority of our guys are now that have been here over 12 months, you can see it in them. And sometimes we've had a few really nice kind of, I don't really want to call them testimonials, but bits of feedback from people, and they will almost always say something along the lines of, better husband, a better father or mother, I've got more balance back in my life. One of our guys in Cheshire who said, I'd actually forgotten what the colour of the outside of my house was previously. Now I'm at sports days, I'm at activity plays, I can take leave, I can spend time with the kids. And when I leave a client, and I'm home at 5 o'clock because I'm only half an hour up the road, and I'm at home and I'm present, and I'm not having to worry about that report I've got to send to the CFO. I'm not worried about this, I'm not worried about that. And in terms of the emotional energy that solves for people. So that's a very long way of saying, if that stuff's important to people, come and have a chat with us. And I think one thing we always will do is we're very clear to assess people's situation, and we say no to more people than we say yes to. We will absolutely say to somebody, if it's not the right time in their life, either for financial reasons or whatever, we will in the right way just turn people back around and say, maybe this is something you need to do in a little bit further down the line, or maybe go and speak to an existing franchisee about joining their team and doing it a different way. There's different ways in which people can become part of our community. But for the right people that are at the right point in their life, it's a game changer.
Amazing. I've loved our conversation today. If someone wants to get in contact with you to learn more about what you do, what's the best way of getting in contact?
If they want to reach out to me, LinkedIn, I kind of hang out there quite a lot. So obviously got my name from the podcast. So hit me up on LinkedIn and drop me a message, and we can start a conversation there. Equally, if you want to learn a little bit more about Sales Geek, kind of more broadly, without speaking to somebody, if you go to salesgeek.world, you pretty much be able to find everything that you need to find there.
Amazing. All right. Thanks so much for your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.